Activision and Atari bury the hatchet. CES is flooded with third-party VCS carts, and video games give Wall Street the jitters. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time 40, 30, and 20 years to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and we are going to be heading... did I get the order wrong? You know this better than I do at this point.
I think it's all good. All good, mate.
All good. Today we're going to be traveling back 40 years to June of 1982. Now, I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, unless he's not, Matt. Hello,
Hi, Carl.
Okay, this is normally the banter section, but yes, we have a huge freaking pile of stuff to get through.
No banter.
So almost no banter, except I will say I am almost through with episode 4 of the latest playthrough podcast series, The Wolf Among Us. And I just have to say two things. Number one, I was screaming at my car stereo as I was listening to it, as you guys were pointlessly debating about Jack Horner and whether or not he's an amalgam of every fairy tale /
yes.
nursery rhyme, because I know this. Number two, the fact that you haven't finished reading the Fables comics, and there's so much stuff that it was like, but that's clear from the comics. Second.
Yes.
And yes. I was a little annoyed that you guys did not immediately catch on when you walked into the whorehouse, the brothel, I should say, that you did not realize all the girls had the red things around their necks. Because when I played it, that was like an immediate alarm bell.
Yeah, didn't notice that, but later on we figured out that was quite important. So
yeah. And I think, and listening to it, I now realize I've played through episode 4 of that game as well. So now I'm not quite sure. Did I do 5 as well? I couldn't remember, but every time you guys mentioned a different scene, I was like, oh yeah, I did play that. I do know what's going to happen next.
So I thought I had played the entire game, but it turns out I had only played the first 2 episodes. So
really? Okay.
3, 4, and 5, they were all new to me, I think.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. No, we just recorded the last episode 5 yesterday. So.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I didn't finish it, so it's only episode 5 I haven't played. So I'm not sure if I'm going to try to play that now that I'm officially on vacation, or if I'm just going to listen to you guys. But I think I might just go ahead and play it before I listen to you guys.
Yeah, it was good. I liked it.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying the hell out of the story, and yeah. So you guys keep up the good work. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. Okay, but enough banter. Before we can turn on the time machine, that we have to do our obligatory journey into one of the games that was reviewed in a publication dated June 1982. And everybody, please remember, when we're talking about June 1982, all the publications that we're going to be citing are newspapers or magazines from that month. Obviously, the news and the magazines happened at some point before that, and that will actually be an issue we'll discuss later, because some of the newspaper articles are a little bit ahead of where the magazines are. But that's just the convention for the show, and it's how we organize stuff. So please don't send me any nasty emails about that. And also remember, you can follow us on all the usual platforms, Twitter, and there's an Instagram that I haven't updated in forever, but at some point I'll get around to that. And you can also follow us on Patreon and support us there, and for just $1 a month you'll get early access to our interview episodes. Latest one is Don Greenbaum, former treasurer of Commodore, fascinating guy, fascinating inside look into how that business worked. And also, you'll get the video version of the segment that we're about to go to, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where the co-host has to play one of the games that was reviewed in a publication dated June 1982 for 7 minutes. And it's a game that they've never played before. While there were some big hitters this month, like the arcade games Zaxxon and Dig Dug, and some very important home computer unofficial conversions, like Jelly Monsters and Rat Race for the VIC-20, we, however, have a slightly more obscure arcade title today, namely Naughty Boy by, and your pronunciation may vary dramatically, Jalico, whatever. Jalico.
Whatever.
Another, whatever. Doesn't matter.
The Japanese leisure company.
There you go. Japanese leisure company, as distributed by somebody else in the United States, as we'll talk about. Are you ready to go, Mads?
I am. I am a naughty boy.
Then let's begin. Welcome back, Mads, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. For those uninitiated who have not played Naughty Boy, how would you describe the game?
So it's a vertical game where you are the naughty boy, I guess, throwing rocks or maybe grenades. I'm not sure. Makes the monsters explode at least. So you throw these rocks or grenades at the monsters, and what your goal is to move up the screen. It scrolls upwards, so you move up the screen, and you need to shoot out some pirate flags. And once you've shot those pirate flags, the roof starts burning, I think, and then you get to the next level. You proceed. So you've got a 4-way stick and a single button, and you need to avoid the monsters. You need to throw your rocks at them, and the fun part is that there's some inertia there to the rocks. If you just click the button, he'll throw it at, I'd like to say, a monster and a half in front of himself. So if the monster is too close to you, you won't actually hit him. It'll hit behind the monster. And so you need to keep your distance to the monsters. But you can actually hold down the button, and then the rock will fly for, well, if you're looking at it horizontally, maybe even half the screen. And then it'll land, but it will land as soon as you release the button. It'll start its descent and then land. So you need to learn how to control your shots there, and that's great fun actually. I really enjoyed that. So beautiful little 1982 arcade game. I really loved it. I would love to try to get better at it. And it's one of those pick up and play games, because as soon as it clicks for you that I can control these shots, and you figure out what the aim of the actual level is, because nobody tells you that at the beginning, it's quite easy to get into it and get to level 4 or 5, for example. So it's definitely a game you can see yourself getting better at quite quickly. And my only gripe with it was that sometimes I felt like the directional controls had a tiny bit of delay, which meant that I got killed by the monsters. I didn't avoid the monsters when I thought I would. But maybe that was just because I was playing with an 8-way stick, and you really need to play a game like this with a 4-way stick.
Well, one of the issues with the review that I did find was they did sort of talk about the unsmooth movement, and it didn't feel responsive enough.
Okay, so could be the game.
It's definitely the game. I mean, the game is running off of a Z80 tacked at 1.5 megahertz.
Okay.
So it is not a very high-tech piece of kit, even at this point in time. And so I think that this is probably also the reason why they went with a 4-way joystick, because diagonals just would have been more than the hardware could handle. And you also notice it while you're playing that, or at least I saw it in the video while you were playing, that there's a lot of overlap of the characters, and bits of sprites sort of flashing in and out of existence. So I think that there is definitely some hardware limitations that they're trying to work around here.
Yeah, that could be it. Could be it, of course.
Yeah.
But I found it really playable, though, even with the slight delay there. So I'd love to try it with a 4-way stick. And maybe just, if you don't have those quick response times, then you need to suit your playstyle to it. Keep your distance to the monsters instead. So it's definitely still a very playable game.
Yeah, and definitely it looked like a lot of strategic elements, especially with that inertia with the throwing.
Yeah, and you can even throw the rock over walls or trees or whatever was in the level where you're going through right now, so you could kill monsters before they could even reach you, for example. So make sure that they wouldn't hurt you. And the monsters had like 2 stages. If you hit them once, they'll be knocked out. And they'll lie there for a long time. So that's actually the best thing to do, because you want to incapacitate the monsters so that you can go and shoot those flags, those pirate flags away in peace and quiet. But if you shoot them once, they get knocked out. If you shoot them again, they die, but then another monster spawns. So you really want to shoot them once and run away, and then get those flags. And there are different kinds of monsters, of course, which they move at different speeds and have different movement patterns. So all classical arcade gaming here. It's it's really nice, actually.
Very cool. And I also wanted to include this game because there is a little bit of interesting business trivia to this game.
Yeah.
As we've seen over the last year or so, a lot of and we'll talk about this in one of the news stories later on, a lot of the Japanese developers are starting to open up their own factories and their own setups in the United States to distribute their own games, because the old model was Japanese manufacturer would then just license or sell the PCB boards to an American arcade company. And that's becoming less and less popular. And Jaleco is one of the last Japanese companies that's not doing their own US stuff, and the game is going to be brought out by a company called Centauri or Centauri. And when they end up showing the game for the first time at a trade show in the US, at the same trade show there's going to be another company selling illegal imports, if you will, of the Japanese game. They're already selling them. They're already out on the market before Centauri can get their official version of the game out.
Okay.
So there's definitely a delay between the launch in Japan of the game and the launch in North America of the game. And it's kind of weird. It's one of these games that's sort of stuck in the old model of doing it, where you're not launching simultaneously or almost simultaneously. And it's going to impact the possibility of success of the game. And the fact that this thing only gets one port to the home, which is on the Casio PV1000, which I had never heard of before this, but is probably a sign of just how limited the reach of this game ended up being.
Yeah.
So, but it was an interesting little side note, and it's an interesting moment in history, but I'm really glad that whole inertia thing with the throwing really does look like a fascinating thing. And there's also a strategic element, because you can also destroy the walls and stuff.
Yes, you need to do that in the later levels. Yeah, definitely the whole inertia with the rocks and the controlling the length that you throw the rocks, that's what makes this fun. So, great little game.
Cool. So definitely a Mads recommendation for future players, correct?
Yeah, I feel like you've been on a really good streak lately, mate. I mean, the past couple of games you've given me, they've been great. So that's good.
You do know that the moment you say something like that, I'm going to have to pull another Champion of the Raj on.
I was just about to mention
that. You do know that, right?
Yes. It'll happen. Listeners. No worries.
I always have a few. There's always the option of doing that. So maybe next time.
Mate, we've got so much to cover today. We're going from, Chuck E. Cheese to the WIC 20 to masturbation. So let's get into this.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to check in with our good friend Ethan for the Department of Corrections to find out what we got wrong last time before we can make new mistakes today. Let's check in with Ethan.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from The Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So,
Yeah.
before you tell me in your very sleepy voice right now what I got wrong in May of 1982, we have...
The Matt's comment. Gotta do my vocal exercises.
Very nice.
Very nice. So, Mads, I'm sorry to say, but Bill Gates never said the 640K thing. By all accounts, this is a total myth.
Just remind viewers, what was the 640K thing?
Supposedly, Bill Gates once said, I don't see why anybody would need more than 640 kilobytes to access on their IBM PCs, because that was the limit that DOS could access at the time. But so that was a limitation that especially the games creators couldn't go beyond. Like, you literally couldn't have anything in 640K unless you did stuff like protected mode and whatnot. That's a whole other thing. But and then basically it took until Windows until we got around those limitations, and then IBM was able to build PCs. Well, not just IBM, the clone makers were able to build PCs, go beyond that limit. And so there was this myth that grew up that the reason you couldn't go beyond 640K in DOS is because Bill Gates was like, no way, that's not a thing. But it's not true.
Very cool. So, myth busted.
Yeah, so basically, people have looked at this, and basically, if there is an original source, it has been obscured into an origin of myth. There is no evidence that he said this, it was supposedly at a conference or something, but, it was not reported at the time.
Gotcha. Okay, well then, we got plenty to cover today, so let's get started.
Indeed. Strap down. Grease up. It's time for the cage match of the corrections. Number 1. Fantasy was not the first game to have a continue. Super Cobra was the first game to have a continue, and you already reported on it in your earlier episodes.
That's what it was, yeah. Sorry, got that one wrong. Yeah, too many shows already.
Take your lumps. Next up, going to the 1972 stuff. Oh, I should say we're in May 1982, but now we're in May 1972 because that's how these things work. Anyways, the Magnavox, they did a series of showings all across the country. Their Magnavox Profit Caravan, as it was called. Not just New York and in Burlingame. I know, Phoenix was one of them. Might have been Chicago as well. Big major cities, except Burlingame, because Burlingame is not a major city in California. It was very weird that they showed up there, but it was indeed a thing. So there was more showings than just New York and Burlingame.
Okay. Yeah, those were the only two I saw mentioned. It could just be because it was a newspaper article, so the other ones hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But the Burlingame one does not get reported. It's only we have the physical evidence that it happened. Gotcha. The vagaries of this early stuff. I mean, there's a whole... Yeah, we'll talk more in the Odyssey episode when we do that. About the vagaries of everything. Then an opinion thing I must put forward. Okay. Tron is not an awful film, is what I would say. Because... but people expect the wrong thing from Tron. They're expecting an action summer blockbuster movie. That's how it was marketed, and that's the way people seem to still think that it is in the present day. It's not that. I can't really tell you what it is. You really just gotta watch it. But
it's very slow.
It is an intellectual movie. That
doesn't make any sense.
Well, in the sense, yeah. I don't think it says what it. It doesn't really say anything, but it is not. Yeah, it's not an action flick. And I think it lost a lot when they tried to do that with Tron Legacy. But anyways, that's just...
Yeah, that's true, too. Okay. It is an awkward movie.
Yes. I will concede that much. I just won't call it awful, because I don't think it is.
Okay.
Now, sales figures for Pac-Man on the VCS. We do have a document that describes this now. In 1982, Pac-Man on the VCS sold 7.2 million copies.
Wow, crazy.
And then in the subsequent years, it gets up to like 7.7 or 7.9 million before we have a cutoff, and we can't see the rest. But I can't remember what the context of this was. But
this was a sales estimate from one of the publications. So we were sort of guessing what it could end up being. And I don't think they even went as high as 7.2 million. They thought it was going to be a lot, but they didn't think it was going to be that much.
Well, indeed it was.
Yes.
So there you go. And next, in mispronunciation, the guy's name for Games by Apollo is Pat Roper, or at least that was how he went by.
Okay.
Then next up, some legal shenanigans. So you could protect the design of a chip back in the 70s. It wasn't codified in the same way. What you had to do is you had to get a trademark on the etching of the chip.
Wow, a trademark.
Yes, a
Interesting.
trademark.
Okay. That is so inappropriate given that it's a functional thing. But oh well.
Or copyright. Yeah, actually I think it's a copyright on the.
Well, you could copyright would leave a lot of room open to interpretation, unfortunately. Especially because it's a functionality thing and not a. I mean, you could argue it's okay. Sorry, the lawyer in me is
I'm not saying it was a good solution, but you could register the etching of a thing with the Copyright Office.
Gotcha.
And on the matter of copyright, code was protected in the 1976 Copyright Act. The question as it comes to the Franklin computer and Apple case was firmware, stuff that is built onto the system, which is different from strictly code, because firmware actually interacts at a hardware level.
Yeah, I thought the way I was understanding the issue with this case was that the firmware was basically code burnt into a ROM chip, which it would essentially be the same thing as a VCS cartridge. And that's what they lose on, is the fact that just because of the medium doesn't stop it from being software.
I don't know the full extent of these things, but you said that basically the code was not protected, and it was. And that was the basis that many of the early video game copyright battles used to win.
No, that's true. That's true. And this is going to be one of the cases that starts to really, really protect the software, even if it's not in text form anymore.
Yes. Next up, you're talking about microprose, and you said Bill Steely went and purchased an Apple computer, or not an Apple computer, an Atari 8-bit computer. But he did not have microprose when he bought that computer. He bought that computer first, and then he later founded microprose with Sid.
Gotcha. Yeah, when I talked to him, I may be misremembering my interview with him, that he said that it was that he bought it in order to do the bookkeeping for this new enterprise.
Wouldn't make
it probably
any
wasn't
sense
called microprose yet, but yeah.
The reason he met Sid is because they were Atari users.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, so he probably bought it to do his own bookkeeping because he was a salesperson for the company. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was doing it for General Instrument or General Instruments, or it's confusing. Anyways, all right, next up, another time you say Vector when it is not Vector.
Yeah, sorry.
Line art is not Vector.
Gotcha.
Or maybe 3D is not Vector. Whichever one it was, you've done them both. Gotcha. I can't scream because it's at night, but Carl.
It happens. I'll try to avoid it in the future.
All right.
I promise.
So this one is not a correction, just a fun little story. You were talking about adventure games being used in early voice systems. And the fun story is that Scott Adams, he has actually remade Adventureland, his original adventure game, for Alexa kind of systems, all in audio.
That's cool.
So that's what he's doing nowadays.
I dig it. That's very cool. I'll have to give that a try. I've got an Alexa.
Indeed. Then next up, Vectrix did not use a Texas Instruments synth chip. It was its own design out of TTL circuits, basically.
Oh, okay, cool.
Then, next up beyond that, Electronic Arts, its original name was not Electronic Arts, it was called Amazon Software. That is what it was originally founded as.
I'm kind of glad they changed that.
Nobody really wanted it to be that name. It was just a name that he was using to hold on to a company as he was getting things together. And you were asked if Tripp had left Apple at the time. Yes, he had indeed left Apple at that time. And basically, the situation is he hooked up with Don Valentine, legendary venture capitalist, and he was allowed to work in their offices while he got everything together for EA.
Very cool.
Or Amazing Software.
Oh, that was a laundry list.
But you have escaped only slightly bruised, only slightly maimed. So next time you will be more careful, yes?
Yes, I will. I will definitely do that. But since you've already seen the corrections for 92, you know that that's only partially true. Okay, so Ethan, as always, thank you for your service, and we will see you back here next time for the corrections for May of 1992.
Ciao, ciao.
So I'm very, very sad here because the 640K comment actually didn't come from Bill. I mean, my life has been a lie call. I've used that so many times. I mean, while I do hate Windows with a fury passion of 1,000 suns, I really like I like Microsoft and I like Bill, and I hope that he'd said that at some point because that was just a wonderful quote. But no.
It's one of those urban legends that, gets mixed together with other things. A similar thing happened when I got to talk to, what's his name? Fallstein of LucasArts, because I had heard the story about how Steven Spielberg was a big flight simulator fan and that they had made a special version of
I'm sure I've read that in a book, actually, at some point.
What?
I'm sure I've read that in a book at some point, that they made a special with the force button, which was actually their debug button that would turn the speed down so they could debug the game.
Well, and that's the thing, that the story I had heard was that they made a special version of it wasn't Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, it was the one that came before it. I can't remember the name now, but a special version to run on his big fat Amiga 3000. That was the story I had heard. And he was like, no, you got it wrong. Yeah, he was playing their games, but he was probably playing them on a PC. And he had come to the office to see their latest games. And when he saw the latest games, he just called up his whoever was buying his PCs or his personal assistant and was like, okay, write down whatever this guy says. And they told him, what hardware they were using in their development system. And he just had the guy write it down. He's like, go and buy that system for me. Because we're playing this game. And that got, combined with the idea of a specialized version of Star Wars with the debug button.
Yes.
And became one weird story that, back in the day when you had magazines and stuff, and I see this all the time in the letters sections, especially in the old Game Doctor. This was this guy who was originally at Electronic Games magazine in the early 80s and then later on at Video Games and Computer Entertainment. And he knows his stuff really well, but you can tell that it's the days before you could cross-reference stuff and there were no reference materials, and he's doing a lot out of memory. And there's so many little mistakes that he's making in the letters column where he's answering people's questions, that you're just like, you're looking back at it, you're like, dude, no, don't you know that that's not the way it was? And there were so many of these rumors that were put into print back then. And when you only had that one magazine every month that you could afford, and you read it 10 times religiously each month because you had no other news about games until next month, a lot of the stuff got seared in your brain even when it was wrong. But oh well.
Yeah.
Okay. That being said, we need to turn on the time machine. When we turn on the time machine today, we're going back further than we've ever gone back on this show before. And probably we may never go further back than this, because we're going back to the very dawn of this whole thing we know as computing. We're going back to 1822.
A jump of epic proportions.
Epic.
Yes.
So, Mads, what's our headline?
Charles Babbage announces the difference engine.
On June 14th, 1822, Charles Babbage presented his paper, Note on the Application of Machinery to the Computation of Astronomical and Mathematical Tables, to the Royal Astronomical Society. The paper was the result of years of work on his difference engine, a machine for automating calculations, the first of its kind.
And thus the idea of a computer was born.
Exactly. It's a machine that can automatically do calculations after you tell it certain basic parameters.
Yes.
So essentially programming it, and it will then spit out numbers. Now, it's obviously not a general purpose machine, and I'm not 100% versed in the mechanics of it. I tried to read up on the mathematics of it, and I was completely lost because that was way outside my pay grade. But his first machine, the Difference Engine 0, which is what he does complete in 22, that sort of works, but it's a very simplified version as far as my understanding of it is. He then gets a ton of money from the English government, total at the end of £17,000, which there's really no proper way of calculating what that would be worth today, but it's a lot. And it never actually works, and he has the finished designs for Difference Engine 2, and that's what you may remember got built in 2002.
Yes.
And it worked. So, he was on the right track. It's just, at the time, just couldn't make it work. But we have here the first automated calculation machine, at least on a theoretical level, that will inspire many others to make similar devices. And it's 200 years ago.
Well, a purely mechanical beast, this one, of course, but well impressive what it was actually capable of doing. And Babbage is hugely important, of course, for computer science as such. One of the buildings, and I still work at the computer science department, actually, at where I also did my PhD, and one of our buildings is named after Babbage, of course. So,
well, yeah, I mean, he's the first name of the entire industry. Now, just out of curiosity, you actually may be able to give some basic understanding of what the difference engine was, or what is the machine trying to do?
I actually don't know, mate. I
okay, cool.
To read up on it myself. I remember actually reading about it years ago when I did my master's, but that's many moons ago, mate.
I hear you. And I became familiar with him because of the chain of software stores called Babbage's in the United States.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and each one of them had this plaque when you walked into the store, and it was engraved with his face and a brief description of him being the father of computing. That's how I first found out about Babbage.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And of course, like everything else, they just kind of got folded into the electronics boutique, software, etc. merger thing that became GameStop. So, oh well.
Which is no more. Oh.
Well, at least it is over here. I mean, the GameStops still exist. They haven't gone under. They became a meme stock.
Okay. So they've gone under here in Denmark, at least.
Yeah, they went under in a bunch of countries.
Okay.
Yeah. But, for example, we still have one here in downtown Halle, and it's like 1/3 of the store is just those stupid little bobblehead dolls. What are they called again? Which ones?
Funko Pops.
Yes. Oh, my God. Don't even get me started. Although I shouldn't say that because I actually have 2 of them on my shelf. So maybe I am the problem. I don't know.
So we jump ahead 140 years.
Yes, and we're jumping to 1962.
Okay, so are you ready?
Yep.
The Carnegie Institute sees computers as future of education.
The Carnegie Commission on Higher Education has issued a report foreseeing the widespread use of information technology such as video cassettes, cable television, and computers in higher education by the year 2000. They recommend the U.S. government spend between $100 and $300 million to ensure the availability and development of these tools.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, you say already in 62 they thought that...
Oh, sorry, it's 72. Oh.
Okay.
Yes, I just looked at the link. I'm like, 72? Oh, yes. No, it's not 62, it's 72.
Okay, it did sound very early. Okay.
Yeah. But it's interesting in 72, that they're thinking in these terms, and their estimation that it's the year 2000, maybe a few years later than it would be, but when you really think about the integration of computer tech into higher education, it's about right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I also thought it was kind of cool that cable television was mentioned as one of the technologies. But then again, in 96, 97, I was doing some of my classes at the University of Florida, where you had, a 200 or 300 person attendance. They were rebroadcasting the lectures that were recorded in the morning that afternoon on one of the local cable channels.
Really?
So, yeah.
Nice.
You could either go to... They would repeat it. They would have lecture halls with screens set up so you could watch it there as a repeat. They also had a room with attendance where you would say, I need so-and-so lecture from this date, and they would pull out the VHS tape of that, pop it into a recorder, and you'd sit down at a little booth with headphones and you could watch it. Or they would rerun it that day, the day it was actually taught on the local cable TV channel. So... we had that option already back then in the late 90s. So I guess, cable television, it did have some very, very powerful applications in that area.
So that's really impressive, mate. I mean, my PhD advisor and I, we introduced that to the university here in 2007, I think. All of our lectures, we started recording and releasing them as, podcast episodes, I guess. And that was completely new and unheard of. So that you did stuff like that or reminiscent of that in the late 90s, that's impressive.
And they'd already been doing it for quite a few years at that point.
Nice.
So the idea, the video replay, especially in the different rooms, like they'd have big projection screen TVs that they would just set up so you could watch it in a lecture hall, in the afternoon or something when nobody else was there, was a great way to sort of spread it out. They didn't do it for all the classes, but they did it for the classes that had really, really big numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, so the intro classes that everybody had to take in the business school. And nowadays, or shortly after I left, they moved everything to real player streaming.
Yes.
But, and so that's just one of those things where I guess the numbers were there, the size of the courses was big enough, and because there's also a profit motive in American universities, it paid off.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so let's move on then.
For some Atari news. Nolan Bushnell contracts with Bally.
Nolan Bushnell, having left Nutting Associates, has gotten a deal to sell coin-op game designs to Bally.
And I'm guessing this is very, very closely related to the next piece of news, which is Atari Incorporated.
Yes, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney have filed articles of incorporation in California for Atari on June 27th, 1972.
So where are we? What have they made so far? When does Pong, the first Pong cabinet, come out?
Well, that's actually the reason we know some of these dates is because of the lawsuits that come out of Pong and the depositions. And I put links in the show notes. Archive.org has some of those documents. So at Nutting Associates is where Nolan Bushnell, I can't remember if Ted Dabney's involved. I think he's involved with the project as well. And Nutting Associates is the one that brings out Computer Space. Which is, the pared down, non-computer, just chip logic version of Space War? And I always keep getting the names of those games messed up. It's the one with the planet in the middle of the two ships trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
But so that first arcade video game is now going to lead to Bushnell saying, okay, no more working with Nutting Associates. He's an independent contractor under the name of Syzygy. And they've just signed a deal with Bally. Now, this is the weird thing. He sends a letter to Bally in July 10th, where he's thanking Bally for, sending him a contract and a payment, and, that he's basically now working for Bally. But it's still on Syzygy letterhead.
Okay.
Even though he's filed the incorporation papers at the end of June. So there's either a small transition period here, or he's just using up the letterhead, or he hasn't gotten confirmation, because this is 1972. It's not like nowadays where you pop it onto a website and you instantly have your corporation. It's possible that he hadn't gotten the paperwork back from Sacramento, the capital of California, giving him the go-ahead that he's now a corporation.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different possibilities there. But basically, Atari is being set up as a company that's going to design coin-op games, not necessarily video. Because also in that letter, he's describing a 4-player pinball game that he wants to design, and he's basically listing parts and stuff that he's going to need to be able to put the design together.
A 4-player pinball, I'd like to see that, see how that works.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It obviously never comes to fruition, and Bally is going to pass on Pong. So remember, we also talked last month about how Bushnell had seen Pong, not Pong, the Magnavox Odyssey.
Yes.
So this is all happening a month after he saw the Magnavox Odyssey. His leaving Nutting Associates was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. That was already planned. And obviously the pinball thing is also going, but it's, they're going to hire their first extra person, Al Alcorn, and he's going to get the task of building Pong. So it's all going to happen in fairly quick succession here, but I don't believe that Al Alcorn's been hired yet at this point. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I think he comes in later than June of 72.
Yep.
So, so it's in the context of they're looking for more machines to design and try to sell, Bally being the customer at this point. But if Bally passes on the design, they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
And so this is how they end up making Pong themselves.
Yes, because Bally passed on it, and they made just one cabinet. And as Nolan tells the story, they made one and put it out just for testing. And then, of course, there's the famous story of it stopped working because there was too much money in the coin slot.
Exactly. And, the rest is, as they say, history. And it is this is a momentous moment. This is 50 years of what you really could consider a video game a dedicated video game business. Now they're going to do some pinball for a while and stuff, but this is the beginning.
Yes.
Even if they're not starting out thinking that they're going to be a video game business. But hey, it's all good. So, with that being said, it is time now to turn on the time machine and head back to 1982.
Knowledge is 1982. Electronic video games.
Entertainment business sales have been generally lackluster. There is so much money to be made.
Welcome to June of 1982. Mads, what's our first story?
Bankers bearish on coin-op.
Despite the industry having raked in a whopping $7 billion with a B in 1981, and this is 80s money, not adjusted for inflation, a new study by Goldman Sachs sees the coin-op video game biz as a shaky investment, comparing it to the movie biz where big hits can make big bangs, but the past is in no way a predictor of where the next hit will come from, making investment in the industry very risky. The short lifespan of a game's popularity has also made the prospect of the games being used as collateral for loans less attractive to the banks, many of whom are now demanding real assets like an operator's home or car as collateral. The general economic conditions have hit the credit markets in a big way, but there seems to be a growing sense from the banks that not all is well in arcade land.
Ooh. It's going to be harsh if they have to put their homes or cars as collateral for loans for starting up an arcade.
This is the interesting thing. They're not as bearish on arcades because those are more permanent structures. The ones who are being extremely impacted by this at this point are the operators, the ones putting machines into restaurants and convenience stores and like.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are really.
Think they've got all of these machines. There's some value in these machines. There's some sell-on value there, so that should be enough. But
no, not really, because the thing is that these machines are not yet being seen as collector's items. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And the moment that the game doesn't earn anymore, it's basically just an empty cabinet. Also remember, we're just at the dawn of the idea of kits, of being able to change out the PCB and have a different game.
Jam boards.
Exactly. Those are still a few years out. We've got Sega doing their kit system. We've got Data East with their cassette system. A couple of others trying to do the interchangeable game thing, but they're all their own thing. So right now, it's still a business where if your machine is dead, your machine is dead. Yes. It's not earning. It's just a liability taking up room in a storage facility. And if it's not earning, there's no collateral value other than, maybe the wood that the thing is made out of.
Yep. I get your point.
And so this is really a problem. And also we have to remember, with the rise of things like Aladdin's Castle, the arcades, while there are still a lot of independent standalone arcades at this point, the idea of arcade consolidation and becoming franchises also makes these individual loans not really an issue anymore. Because, an Aladdin's Castle doesn't need to worry about, one store. They're getting a loan for 20 stores or 50 stores or whatever.
Yeah.
And as we'll also see in a moment, there's new competitors and new formats for the arcade, which are also becoming more and more attractive, making the individual operator putting the machines in random locations a bigger and bigger risk for the banks.
Yeah.
And we also have to remember, as we've talked about several times, this is also the era when everything is booming in the video game business. The general economy is in the absolute dumps. This is hardcore recession time. And all of those people that we've talked about previously who have been suckered into investing their life savings into buying some broken down, barely playable arcade games and hoping to make a fortune off of them are also sort of, filling in this mass of independent operators. And when a bank is looking at this from a statistical standpoint, there's a lot of operators who aren't making any money.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Makes sense, mate.
And it's only going to get worse with the next story.
Yes, federal spending cuts hit coin-op.
As the Reagan administration begins to cut federal money disbursements to states, local governments and universities are looking to the hot coin-op industry to help bolster their budgets as federal revenue sharing schemes are dramatically cut. Many of the local taxes imposed on coin-op machines, while partially driven by fears over the pervasiveness of coin-op machines, are also in part meant to fill budget gaps. Universities are also feeling the pinch, with universities like Temple University using their on-campus games revenue of $125,000 to help keep next year's tuition increases below 10%, something most schools are not able to do.
So they had a lot of coin-op machines, and they earned $125,000 on those?
In 1 year.
In 1 year.
Just off the machines that were on campus, yeah.
Okay, so and I find it funny that keeps the tuition increases below 10% because the students are paying anyway. They're just putting the money into game machines.
Well, and this is something, again, I mean, we don't talk a lot about what's happening outside of the game business on this show, but I think that there's certain socioeconomic and political events happening at this very moment in time that are impacting it. So, and again, for non-American listeners, the idea of a student union is a little bit strange because you don't really have them in that sense in other countries. So a student union is basically a big entertainment center at the university. For example, University of Florida, when I was there, the student union had a movie theater, a bunch of eateries. It had a big hall full of not pinball, but pool tables, a bowling alley, an arcade room, dance hall, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. That was the student union.
Okay.
A theater for theatrical presentations, and it was the place, you would go and hang out after classes or something, or, where to go and meet up with friends and blah, blah, blah. And, of course, those things can generate capital because you had to pay for the pool tables and all this stuff. And those are the kind of places where these devices have been set up, these coin-op machines have been set up, and the university is making money off of them. And in addition to that, because the U.S. government at this point is reconfiguring the way that tax dollars are going out. So Reagan has been cutting taxes, especially on the wealthy. And that money is no longer there, but instead of borrowing more, which he will do massively, instead of that, he's just cutting this federal money going to the individual states. And the individual states, unlike the federal government, can't print money. So they have to find new ways of saving money. And at the same time, in the general populace, you have a pretty massive inflationary push. Not that people listening to this in the year 2022 know anything about inflation.
No.
Because we're going through inflation too right now, in case you're listening to this in the future. And so there's this effect that everything is getting more expensive, but universities getting massively more expensive than it was before because of the general inflation plus the lack of federal money coming in. And so a lot of these towns and stuff that are taxing the apparently only boom industry in the country is not just because, it'll help save the kids, but it's like, oh, this is a quick way for us to make a buck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of articles about it this month. There's a link to a New York Times article that breaks down the numbers very nicely too. And remember, everybody, all the references and all the sources for what we're talking about are in the show notes, so please check those out.
Speaking of numbers, Chuck E. Cheese reports earnings.
Oh, yes. Revenues grew from $5.3 million in the first quarter of 1981 to $17.2 million in the first quarter of 1982. This is just the quarter numbers. Pizza Time Theater's number of stores grew from 28 stores in 1982 to 100 by the end of the first quarter of 1982. Sorry, 28 stores in 1981 to 100 by the end of the first quarter of 1982.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just astronomical growth, and they have so many more stores in the pipeline that are going to be opening up. It's scary.
And then it's going to crash.
Yeah, and remember, it's Pizza Time Theater isn't the only one. We've also got Sega has opened up their own chain with a similar bent. We've got now I'm blanking on the name, but there's the rival of Chuck E. Cheese that is doing basically the same thing with the animatronics.
Yes.
We've got a couple of other chains that are opening up. Bally's got their own chain that's doing something similar. So this is another new concept for the arcade, the family restaurant / arcade entertainment center that is also a paradigm shift that is, again, putting pressure on the small-time operator because it's not something they can compete with.
Yeah. So, next piece of news is that Atari and Gottlieb split the Krull license.
Yes, Columbia Pictures' upcoming fantasy film Krull will be brought to video games through a split license, with Atari handling the home games and Gottlieb, a Columbia subsidiary, handling the arcade and pinball rights. The movie is shooting in England for a summer 1983 release.
So we've seen that a couple of times. Is this the first time we see this kind of split license?
And as far as I know, it is the first time. Now we've talked already about Tron. Tron also has a split license.
Yeah.
The arcade rights are with Williams, and Mattel has the home rights. And this, I think, it's partially the effect of the fact that a lot of these deals probably happened 6 or 7 months beforehand. Or happen with a little bit of foreground space. Also, remember, last Christmas there was only one third-party publisher for the consoles. That's about to change. So there weren't that many companies that you could have sold home rights to. It's not like Gottlieb or Williams were making their own cartridges. They were purely arcade game makers. And in the case of Tron, Mattel doesn't make arcade games. So there it made sense. But the fact that Atari isn't getting the arcade license that's going to Gottlieb is also a side effect of Columbia is one of these conglomerates that also happens to own Gottlieb. And, they've got 1 foot in video games, 1 foot in movies. But I guess the real takeaway here, and the reason I'm including it, is because these licenses are getting so much more important. The name recognition, just, releasing a game that has the word space in the title isn't enough anymore. And we're going to see a deluge of licenses, especially movie licenses to games that, well, the most notorious, of course, is yet to come with the biggest movie of the summer, which hasn't been released yet at this point, with E.T. That's coming this year as well.
But it doesn't have Liam Neeson. Krull has Liam Neeson. So.
Krull does have Liam Neeson. Did he play the Cyclops in that?
Oh, I forget what his role was.
I can't remember what he played anymore. It's been so long since I've seen that movie. I just remember when it came out, and I was just like, "Oh, this looks so good." And but I didn't actually get to watch it until many years later. I didn't get to go see it in the theater.
See, I've only watched it back in the day, not in '83 because I would have been 6 years old, I guess, but a bit later. I really want to watch that again.
Yeah, it is one of those movies where it's either really, really has redeemable values that you would only see as an adult, or it's just going to be so bad it's good.
Yes,
And
like Double Dragon, for example.
Like Double Dragon. We still need to do that. We definitely
the most
need
beautiful
to do
movie in the world.
that. Now you may be overselling it just a little bit.
No.
So he plays a character called Keegan, but I have no idea what that's all about.
Okay. Now let's move on from Double Dragon and on to Japanese imports drying up.
Yes. Japanese arcade game manufacturer Takon reports in their April newsletter that the shift by big Japanese game makers like Data East, Nichibitsu, Nintendo, Sega, Taito, and Universal to manufacturing their games in the USA is leaving U.S. makers few options for licensing Japanese-made games. While Namco and Takon are fully vertically integrated and can both design and export their PCBs to U.S. licensees, others like Konami and SNK lack that vertical integration. Yeah. And this is something that we mentioned earlier in the 7 Minutes in Heaven segment, something that happened to Jaleco's Naughty Boy, where, they licensed it to Centauri, but by the time Centauri got their stuff up and running, the imported boards were already in the U.S.
Yeah.
And the Japanese developers or publishers who are being able to launch the games themselves in the U.S. can make sure that the launches are almost simultaneous. And if you have to release the game in Japan, then find somebody to license it to, or just have that delay period, the world is getting too small for that. The market's too hot, and people will get those gray boards in.
It seems that would be a real problem for those that can't release in the US at the same time.
It is going to become a real problem, and it's also going to mean that if you really do have that hot game, you're going to have to get it early. We're already seeing that with the ports. Like, for example, Donkey Kong, Coleco picked up the home rights before the game even came out in Japan, let alone in North America. And so this idea of, we can wait and pick it up later on after it's become a hit in Japan is no longer an option. Of course, that also means that you're buying a lot of games before you know if it was a hit in Japan. And there's going to be a lot of, crappier games that make it over that are just have no real value, but you've already paid money for the license.
Yeah.
And so this is why, you're really going to have to make the games yourself. But a lot of these American manufacturers are getting into video a little too late, or at least into the idea of developing their own video a little too late.
Okay.
Yeah.
So experts suggest arcade games may become collectible.
The often discarded husk of a coin-op game that no longer earns its keep may someday be worth money as a collectible. Steve Gronowski, owner of Mechanical Antiques and Amusement Company of Chicago, see the potential of a game like Pac-Man to be a real collector's item. 30 or 40 years from now, Pac-Man may be very collectible. It's kind of a neat game, he said.
It is kind of a neat game, and yes, he was so right.
Oh, definitely. Now, if you calculated up how much you would actually pay in storage fees to keep that game around for 40 years, probably not that collectible. But it is it was an interesting little side note in a trade publication called Games People Pay.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a fun little insight into the future of where we are now, and also goes back to my interview with Jim Trucano, former AMOA president, who was an arcade operator at this time. And when he recalled that, his first day on the job was to take a whole bunch of old Pong machines to the dump and just get rid of them.
So I was just about to say that back in the day, in beginning of the 90s, I knew one of my friends, they had a chip shop, and there were 5-6 arcade machines there. And sometimes I'd meet the guy who came and changed the arcade boards there. And at some point he came and changed the arcade board for, I forget the game, Bubble, some of the one of the really big titles. And I said, so what are you doing with that now? It's an old game. I'm just going to throw it out. And I said, can't I have it? But he said, well, you can't really use it, but you can buy it for like, what would have been like 12, 15 euros in today's money, I guess. Mm. And that was a lot of money for me back in the day. So I said no, but man, I should have picked those games up. But they just threw them away, the boards, when they were done with them.
Yeah. I mean, what were you going to do with it? This was
exactly.
a tool for earning money, and storing the stuff was just going to cost you money. And the idea that people would pay 25 cents or whatever to play an old game that had already run its course was inconceivable.
Yep.
And especially if you were one of these operators who, you only got to put one machine in this chip shop. And if you owned an arcade and you had to fill the arcade up, you'd have, your big earners in the front, but you'd still have to fill up the space. Yeah, now you can put all those older games in there. They're not going to earn that much, but the arcade doesn't look empty. You always have something for people to play, et cetera, et cetera. And this is really where the financial incentives or the financial structure of an operator's business is a completely different beast to what the arcade operator's business is.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah. Still sad,
and
though.
There's an upcoming interview. Sorry, as a sneak peek, there's an upcoming interview with the founder of the arcade I used to work in as a teenager. I've already recorded it. It's coming in a couple months, especially for those Patreon patrons, where we go into exactly this issue. And it's quite cool. Okay, sorry.
So that would be for the Sega's place in Seattle?
Yeah, the Seattle Funplex.
Nice.
Yeah, and actually I've got another one lined up. The general manager, the guy who actually interviewed and hired me, I've got him hopefully going to interview him in a week or so.
Okay.
And so that'll be a second one because he was more into the day-to-day operations than the founder, who was more into the bigger issues.
Cool stuff, mate.
Yeah, no, that interview was so great because it was like the two of us reminiscing about, all these things that we knew in common and stuff. It was great stuff. It's a great interview. Only about half of the time we actually talked is going to end up in the recording, but it was just fun. So,
yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good. So, Thief adds list Bernie Stolar as director.
Yes. Given the recent passing of Bernie Stolar, giant of the industry, it was worth mentioning that the multi-page ads for Pacific Novelty Manufacturing's game Thief, it's an arcade title, list various participants in the making of the game, including one Bernie Stolar as director.
So I actually don't know Thief as an arcade game. Do you know anything about it?
I booted it up once very, very briefly. It's not one of those games that people, remember fondly. Okay. Once it gets reviewed in an issue or two, in a month or two, we might add it to the 7 Minutes in Heaven. It looks more or less like a maze chase game with probably some additional elements added. But the ads are set up to make it look like an old silent movie cop comedy. Okay. The Keystone Cop thing.
Yeah.
Are familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the credits for it, list, the director and, starring and blah, blah, blah. And they're all names of the people at the company. And so when I saw Bernie Stolar's name, I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm not sure if it's his first credit in the arcade business or not, but it just seemed appropriate to mention it here because I've been trying to get an interview with him for forever, and now I know why he wasn't responding because unfortunately he was very ill and has now passed away.
Okay.
But he's somebody we've mentioned often here on the show, and we will continue to mention for years to come because, he was involved with the PlayStation, with the Sega Saturn, with the Dreamcast. He was just huge.
Okay. So, let's go to something different. Video games add pep to the dreary CES.
Before we do that, before we make this transition out of arcades, it's time for Count Up to the Crash. Remember that, everybody, we are in 1982. It's the year of the crash, and we are counting up all the companies and events that are going to lead to the video game crash. Mm-hmm. Also, just a quick note, as I mentioned during the banter section, we do have a bit of a crossover here because there are some newspaper articles talking about the Summer CES, that's a Consumer Electronics Show, as it's happening, and the magazine articles that we're talking about are obviously printed way before that. They're more or less previews of what will show up at CES. So there's going to be a little bit of overlap here, and for the next month or two, we will definitely be talking about more reports from CES as more and more stuff was revealed and slowly trickles into the publications. So just as a program note. Okay, go for it.
I'll go for it. Video games add pep to dreary CES.
An otherwise moribund Consumer Electronics Show had a bright side with the massive number of new game companies vying for market share. Over a dozen new manufacturers of VCS games showed their wares at CES, ranging from upstarts like Apollo and iMagic to established media and toy companies like MCA and Parker Brothers. The tough economic times are also pushing other companies like Emerson and Tyrone, who normally make audio equipment, who are trying their hand at computerized games with chess and backgammon games. The real question will be how this deluge of product will fit into the very narrow retail funnel.
Badly. Everybody
yes.
and their mother is making video games at this point in time.
Yeah. Now, just for the uninitiated, Consumer Electronics Show is basically a twice-a-year, very large, a trade show. Essentially, it's where retail buyers, that's the stores, can meet up and see the new products from manufacturers, and they're taking orders. So the winter CES that happens shortly after Christmas, that's basically just, hey, would this shiny object be interesting to you? And if the retailers start to show interest, then they come back in the summer with a more finalized, ready-to-go product, and they're trying to take orders for the Christmas season.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going on here. So, yeah, this is closed off to the public. It's just the business side, and it's all of these companies trying to make money off of VCS games.
Yes.
Yeah. Remember, unlike later with the NES, there's really no licensing fee necessary. Now, some people will have to pay some kind of licensing, but for the most part, everybody is just making games because they've bought some manuals or something that allow them to reverse engineer or figure out how the VCS works.
Yeah. So much crap being made.
Oh, it's going to be a shit show.
Let's move into a piece of news that will excite most of the my fellow members at the Retro Asylum because they do love their Vectrix. GCE introduces Vectrix.
General Consumer Electronics Corporation has debuted the Vectrix, a self-contained programmable game console that utilizes a 9-inch diagonal monochrome vector screen. Hey, I used vector the right way this time.
You did.
The system will go on sale in 7 test markets in October with a nationwide rollout in early 1983.
Yes, a beautiful machine that I've actually never seen in real life.
You've never seen a Vectrix in real life?
I've never seen or played with a Vectrix, no.
Oh, dude, you got to come down to Langenacht Computerspiele. They've got a Vectrix there every year.
I'd love to play with one of those. So some of the guys at the Retro Asylum have them, and they love their Vectrix. Vectrices? Vectrixes? I'll go with Vectri. That's a lot better. So it's definitely a nice little machine, and with a lot of modern development going on for it as well. So definitely a very collectible piece of kit. But supposedly they break quite easily because they have these little vector screens in them. So not something I want to spend thousands of dollars on myself.
And this is really the problem. The vector screen is not necessarily large. 9 inches is not a big screen.
No.
It's monochrome, so you have to have these little overlays to get
got these
any
nice
kind of color.
overlays. Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is that the processor in it kind of can't do that many points at any given time. So when you're dealing with
they don't do points. They do like lines, mate. It's vector graphics.
Well, yeah, but you still have to connect points.
True.
And so it really becomes an issue of as soon as there's too much stuff on the screen, it does start to flicker a little bit. I know Vectrix people are going to scream at me for that. The game starts to flicker. It's not something I would spend a tremendous amount of time actually playing. It's absolutely fascinating as a tech thing, and also the controllers are not the best. They're kind of small and cramped because, of course, they're attached to the device, and they sort of click. If I remember correctly, they click into the front of it when you're not using them.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun thing
Like
to
the
have
Famicom.
looked at. Like the Famicom, yeah. Very much in line with that. Now, I'm not sure the total history of this, but a GCE, I believe, is made up of some people who have a relationship with Milton Bradley. They're either former Milton Bradley people or they're sort of doing this as an offshoot. But what will end up happening is that Milton Bradley will actually take over the Vectrix operation in 1983. Okay. So the initial launch will be as GCE, but I think they're going through the Milton Bradley distribution channel, and then in 1983, Milton Bradley will take over the entire operation. Yeah. So, because most people think of Vectrix as a Milton Bradley product, the board game company, and yeah, they're already related. I'd have to look up the details. I don't know them off the top of my head, but ultimately it will be a Milton Bradley product.
Okay. So on to other news. NTEX introduces the Adventure Vision.
Yes. So many consoles. NTEX has jumped into the programmable games market. Now, they've jumped into programmable games market with the self-contained Adventure Vision system. Employing a rotating mirror system similar to the one Nintendo used years later in the Virtual Boy, the single row of red LEDs manages to create a full 150 by 40 resolution screen image. An initial lineup of 4 games, most licensed from the arcade, Turtles, Space Force, Super Cobra, and the Pac-Man Defender, promise to bring arcade action home for the low price of just $69.99.
So it's a single row of red
LEDs. Not light bulbs, LEDs. And what it's doing is this one line of LEDs is switching between each of the lines of the screen, so the 40 vertical lines of the screen, and the mirror is flashing back and forth so often that it's creating the appearance of permanence on the screen. I found some video online of this, and yeah, I mean, obviously when you videotape it, it flickers horribly. But according to the websites, it's a pretty good effect.
I'd like to see this, actually.
Yeah. Again, links to some of the stuff is in the show notes. There's a whole adventurevision.com is the website where they go into detail on all this stuff.
Okay.
And so it is doing a lot with very little tech, so that the little motor for the mirror apparently is the thing that's going to break the most.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But having just the one line of LEDs really probably cut the cost of the system dramatically. And it is using programmable cartridges. So in theory, this is yet another console hitting the market. But it is very, very limited because, what can you do with a truly monochrome screen? There's no shades of red. It's just red or black. Dot.
Yeah. Okay.
Unlike, the Virtual Boy that could still do some shades, this doesn't even have that level to it.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like something that would be a huge success.
No. They only end up making those first 4 initial games. They do announce a bunch of other ones, and curiously enough, the one I really would have liked to see is Black Knight Pinball, which would have been, if my understanding is correct, a port of the actual Black Knight pinball table.
Okay.
So how that would have worked on this system, I have no idea. But damn, I'm curious to find out what the plan was with that. So
sadly, you'll never know, mate.
No, I never will.
No.
Oh well.
So, standalone electronic games bet on licenses.
Oh yeah. After a slow year that saw many electronic game makers drop out of the market, those manufacturers still in the game are betting on big licenses. Arcade hits like Pac-Man, Scramble, Donkey Kong, Galaxian, and Frogger are all being turned into electronic handhelds or tabletops, with licenses like D&D and Tron also getting the gaming treatment.
Yeah, I definitely remember this from back in the day. So many funky little, not fun at all, electronic toys with those big names on them.
Oh yeah. And this is the thing that that first wave of these games that we've talked about a couple years ago already here on the show. You know, when you could do Mattel football and Coleco football and stuff, where that would be enough to get people interested. The shakeup that happened where so many of the lower end manufacturers basically went under the last Christmas, or the Christmas before that even, has now ended up with, if you're going to release one of these games and you want to get retail space, you have to have a recognizable name. You have to have a license attached to it. And I mean, we've seen this before. If you, we're both European gamers. If you look at where was the 8-bit computer market in 1991, virtually every game was either a movie tie-in or an arcade port.
Yep.
And those were increasingly bad games because either the game had to be rushed if it was a computer, if it was a movie license, or if it was an arcade port, the chances of getting a Spectrum to do a good arcade conversion kept getting worse and worse and worse as time went on. Something similar is happening here. Like you said, these games, most of them are pretty unplayable crap. But, you know, hey, you can have a Pac-Man, a small Pac-Man arcade machine at home. Hell yeah. And, yeah, the name recognition alone is going to be it. You also see some interesting stuff like a computer or chip-enhanced version of Monopoly as a board game is also out there. And a lot of these chess computer devices, you know, where you can play chess against the built-in machine, those are also huge at this point. And one of the items that was also listed in Toy and Hobby World, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, have you ever seen the Little Professor calculators?
Oh, mate, I wanted one of those so badly.
I had one of those.
Really?
Yeah, I had one as a kid. And yeah, that thing is premiering at the CES.
Okay.
And they're just iconic. I mean, that's just like an 80s staple.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other big one is Game Watches. There's a ton of Game Watches coming out.
So I got a Little Professor, but later, a lot later than this. So
yeah, well, I probably didn't get it the first year, but I'm pretty sure I got it the second year, and I probably got it used. Okay. My mom was the queen of finding stuff at flea markets when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so this is why all of these things, these 80s tech that we all think about, when we think of the 80s, a lot of it is going to premiere here at the Summer CES in 82.
Okay. Cool.
Because, yeah, everybody wants a piece of this pie now.
Yeah, of course. Of course. So, Mattel wants a piece of the pie as well. Mattel has finally launched the Intellivision keyboard component. Sorta.
The long-delayed keyboard component for Mattel's Intellivision that would turn the console into a fully functional computer has launched in, quote, several test markets, end quote. In reality, it was launched in just 2 with very limited quantities, and the hoped summer nationwide rollout would never be.
So we all know that this was never to be, and they knew. So they just did this because they had to.
They had to because there were either already lawsuits or threats of lawsuits. And so basically they did the bare legal minimum to get it out there, and that was it.
Mate, who did you interview who told this story?
Don Daglow.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, he was.
Great interview.
He was there in software development, and he actually made a program for the keyboard component.
Yeah, knowing that it would never happen.
Well, not when he first started, but it became quite obvious as he was working on it that this thing was a dud.
Yeah.
So yeah. But that's done. Yes.
Moving on from that failure, ColecoVision to have VCS add-on.
Coleco has announced, in addition to the details of their new console, that will be able to play games that are up to 32K in size and move up to 48 objects on screen, that a VCS compatibility add-on will be available. Will this be the ultimate console, having access to both its own cutting-edge games and the massive VCS library?
So I wonder how they implemented this.
It's basically just a VCS on a chip.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be an emulator back in those days.
No.
It would actually just be a VCS that was plugged into the machine.
Yeah,
and using the joypads and the screen output.
Yeah, well, because remember, the ColecoVision is a Z80 based machine.
Yeah. And
the VCS is a 6502 based. So yeah, you can't really use any of the hardware.
Nope.
But at this point, the VCS is so old and the chips have gotten so cheap, it's not really that big of a deal.
No.
You know? And the idea that, by a ColecoVision, you can play all the games.
Yeah.
Is a huge selling point. Yeah,
definitely.
And it just shows, the fact that they can even get away with this is insane.
Yes.
Think
Those
about
different times.
Yeah, think about, Sega Master System. Buy the NES add-on so you can play all your NES games on a Sega Master System. Oh my God, that would have been a lawsuit and a freaking half.
Oh yeah.
But oh well. And this whole thing is still part of our count up to the crash. These are all products that are going to be announced or are programmed to be announced at CES. Just imagine you're a retailer, having a toy store retailer, having to figure out which of these very expensive products you're going to have to buy to put in your store, and how are you even going to build a strategy around trying to sell this crap?
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
And we're not done yet. Sorry. I'm just interjecting this so that people listening can try to imagine the plethora of stuff and the business problem that is about to explode. So
okay. even more games here. Tiger Electronics enters the VCS market.
Tiger Electronics, purveyors of fine handheld LCD games.
Not fine. Handheld, just scratch the fine stuff.
Well, at this point, there, I guess still, yeah. Standards were lower back then. They didn't rise, but standards were lower. And I still stand by, and I've said this many times, their Gauntlet handheld game is still amazing.
Okay, never tried that.
I actually still occasionally play it. It's up on archive.org. It is worth giving it a go. I'll send you the link. I'll put it in the show notes, too, for everybody. Okay. Purveyors of fine handheld LCD games is jumping into the VCS cartridge market with the new Tiger Vision label. The label would produce several 2600 ports of popular computer games like Jawbreaker and Manic Miner.
So Manic Miner is actually a really good game.
Not on the 2600 today.
Oh, okay.
Manic Miner is a really good game. It will be the inspiration for what's the British game? Not Jet Set Willy, but the one before that. What's it called again?
That's Manic Miner made. I mean, Matthew Smith made Manic Miner, and then he made Jet Set Willy.
I'm thinking Miner 2049er.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, sorry. I think this is. I think they port Miner 2049er. One second.
Makes more sense because this is the Manic Miner is the British ZX Spectrum game.
No. That's not the game that they port. It's Miner 2049.
Makes more sense. More sense.
Yeah, Miner 2049er, and that game is the one that inspires, in large part, Manic Miner,
which is the beauty of a game.
Yes.
Really, really well designed game by Matthew Smith.
Yes, it is a classic, hard as balls, but classic.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, the Atari 2600 version of Miner 2049er, as ambitious as it is not really a game that you want to play.
Okay.
It's quite terrible, actually. And it's just too ambitious for the 2600.
But now for something completely different.
Yeah.
Fox enters cartridge market.
Yes. Movie maker Fox announced that it was joining the fray of media companies to release games for the Atari VCS.
Wait a second, that wasn't something completely different.
No, it's just more of the same because everybody's doing it. The announcement came on the first day of the summer CES. Its first 4 titles will be available by October 1st. The New York Times article also mentions that Lucasfilm is partnering with Atari to release titles, and MCA and Paramount are also getting into the business.
So many VCS cartridges, mate. It's crazy.
This is going to be a shit show of epic proportions.
Yes.
And they're all going to be done in time. And, of course, as we already talked about with Apollo last month, a lot of these are going to be barely functional titles because people don't actually know how to program the very difficult-to-program VCS.
Yep.
And the Fox thing is something that we kind of talked about when I interviewed Jerry Jewell. Jerry Jewell was the co-founder of Sirius Software, and they will actually be the primary supplier of games early on for Fox. And so Fox is officially the publisher, and they're going to give some initial funding to Sirius to finance the games and give them the licenses to make games based on it, like Fantastic Journey. Or Fantastic Voyage, the old movie, where they shrink the people down and put them into the body. Mm. The only problem is that when this whole thing goes belly up, Fox is going to, and Jerry tells the story quite eloquently. I'll link the interview in the show notes. But basically, they're going to leave him high and dry, and this is going to be the downfall of Sirius Software.
Okay.
So getting into the VCS market is going to kill a lot of people. Tiger Vision, some of the games that they were talking about, like Jawbreaker, that was a Sierra game. So they actually get the license to do Sierra titles. Exactly what the relationship is between them and Sierra and how that comes about is something that I'd have to talk to Ken Williams about again. And I actually meant to do that, try to contact him before we recorded, but I didn't get to it. So I'm not sure if Tiger just bought the license or it was, again, an issue there. Tiger is just publishing the games that Sierra themselves created for the VCS.
Yeah.
But I do, in my interview with Ken Williams, he did talk about how the cartridge market basically almost bankrupted him.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of those things where obviously he's got some skin in that game, even though Tiger is the one officially showing the games off at a CES.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's fun stuff.
Activision and Atari bury the hatchet.
Atari's legal action attempting to stop Activision from making games for the VCS has finally been settled out of court. Activision will pay a licensing fee to Atari on all its future VCS titles.
So do everybody, we've just heard about so many people wanting to make VCS titles. Do they all have to pay a licensing fee to Atari?
No.
So why does Activision have to do it?
Because Activision was made up by former Atari employees who may or may not have been taking insider information and didn't do a proper reverse engineering of the system.
No clean room implementation there.
Exactly.
Okay.
So exactly what the conditions of the contract were and how this all played out is still closed doors. But basically, the original founders had to pay, had to just sign off on it. Atari got some money, and that was the end.
Okay.
And it's interesting that it's happening around this time because it's clearly the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
And there is famously one guy who actually did a clean room reverse engineering and had put together this manual. This is how you make a VCS game, and was selling that to different manufacturers for X amount of money. And so a lot of them were able to jump into this market without having to pay Atari any kind of licensing fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in more Activision news, Activision don't care about the whole lawsuit thing because they just announced new games.
Oh, yes. Coming in September, Activision will be launching 4 new games: Mega Mania, Chopper Command, Star Master, and a little game called Pitfall, or maybe Pitfall Harry's Jungle Adventure. They aren't sure yet.
So, David Crane's masterpiece.
David Crane's masterpiece, also the game that will be the biggest seller that year, if memory serves me right, and pretty much the high point of VCS gaming.
Oh, yes. Beautiful game. Beautiful game.
Yeah. Absolutely gorgeous. And unfortunately, this is where, all the other crap that's on the market is going to pull down even these really great games.
Yeah. But still, Activision earnings jump tenfold.
The first third party has reported their second annual sales numbers. At $60 million for the fiscal year ended March 31st, that is tenfold what they generated the previous fiscal year. Now employing about 100 people, the company is primed for more explosive growth.
Bad timing, though. Bad timing.
Yes and no. Activision is going to survive the crash better than most, but they will have to do a very quick pivot over to computers.
Yes.
And when I talked to Gary Fischbach, who was an Activision executive at this time, we talked extensively about that pivot, especially things like the licensing of Ghostbusters, which really, really was a huge, huge boon to Activision in the post-crash period.
Okay.
Because he's the one who arranged that license. It's very interesting to hear, how do you deal with the collapse of that market? And as we will see here in a few minutes when we get to the computer section of the show, the computer market, there's a lot going on there as well. So there will be a fallback position for the companies that can make that move. And just as a side note, Coleco has also reported big gains and is predicting sales of over $300 million for the coming year, and has almost doubled its short-term credit facility to $72.5 million. So they've got a big, huge line of credit so they can ramp up production, especially the ColecoVision. And Mattel has seen their first quarter sales jump 52% year over year to $290 million, mostly on the strength of electronic games and Intellivision.
Okay.
So across the board, all of these companies are seeing their first quarter sales jump.
Yes.
Which is not the norm. You're not supposed to be seeing big numbers like this outside of the Christmas season.
No.
And this is leading a lot of people to talk about video games are no longer just a Christmas business. They are a year-round business, and there's even articles in the toy trade magazines for the toy retailers talking about how this could finally revolutionize the toy industry so we're not just stuck worrying about Christmas every year.
Yeah.
Of course, the problem with that is, as we'll talk in a moment, video games are more expensive than regular toys, but that's another issue entirely.
But still, with all of this positivity, fear of crash hit Warner stock.
Warner stock is off 20% from its high of $58.50 a share just a few months ago. down to 47 1/8 a share, due to short sellers betting that the video game market has been saturated. Those that are bullish on the market see new tech as well as the growing computer market as expanding, and Atari, a Warner subsidiary, as being in the perfect position to take advantage of that move. One even speculates that Warner Brothers, despite its very diverse holdings, will be seen as a software company by the mid-'80s.
So this is interesting because we just heard about all of these companies reporting really, really big earnings in the first quarter. So why is this fear of a crash already? I mean, I would think this would come a couple of months down the line.
Because everybody's looking at the numbers and the explosive growth has to come to an end. And if you're looking at just how many new competitors are coming in and how overcrowded the market is going to be, and the fact that, remember, Atari is selling the console, but they're not going to be selling all the software. There's other people coming in. Who's got the biggest license? Yeah, granted, they had Pac-Man, but the chances that Atari is going to be the ones selling the most software is also limited. And because remember, the previous Christmas, there was only one third party, Activision. So if you wanted to make games for the Atari, you had to be a company called Atari.
Yep.
And now suddenly you're going to have Parker Brothers releasing Star Wars-based games like Empire Strikes Back. You're going to have all these other companies making games for the 2600 using all these big licenses and everything else. Atari may not have another killer app for this Christmas. They're going to get diluted. And the short sellers are like, no, we don't think it's going to make it. And this is affecting the stock. I mean, granted, the stock is going to go back up again. We're going to see, people start to think, oh, no, it won't be a problem. But it is interesting that we're already seeing, people on the real market watchers are like, no. This is going to not go well. Now, also remember, we've talked about this. Atari is going to be introducing the 5200, their next system, this year.
Yeah.
So amongst all these other consoles that are out there, they're going to be introducing their brand new system, which is not going to go over well. The 5200 is a bit of a dog.
Yeah.
And Atari is also still has their computer division. So they have a lot of different products, all basically competing for the same consumer dollar, and that's why these guys have it dead to rights. These short positions are going to really pay off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, toy retailers prepare for the cartridge onslaught.
This month's Toy and Hobby World magazine has a lengthy article about the increasing pursuit of toy retail space by console game makers. Questions about displays for the games, how to train staff to deal with the new items, whether this is going to be a price-oriented field or a quality one, are all unanswered. With roughly half of all console owners having purchased their machines in the last 12 months, and dozens of new companies popping up making software with no track record, how are retailers supposed to prepare without missing out? Activision recommends carrying a company's complete line as older titles are still new to most consumers. And Will Grubb of iMagic probably put it best when he said that the most important thing for the retailer will be to make sure that they are selling a good game.
That's going to be tough in this market when everybody's making games.
Everybody's making games. And also remember, these are retailers, toy retailers who maybe last year weren't even carrying games or maybe only carried a handful of games, who have no experience or the ability to judge this. I mean, they know toys. They can look at a toy and probably tell you after 20 years of experience, yeah, kids will find this cool or kids won't find this cool. But they have no way to judge if a game is going to be good or not.
Nope.
And it's totally foreign. They have virtually no staff that knows anything about this. And if they're buying, a pig in a poke, and just because the game on display at CES works doesn't mean that the cartridge that you ordered is going to work or that's going to be fun. So, yeah, it's going to be a headache. Now, a couple of interesting things did come out of this, and one of them was that some toy retailers apparently report getting the cold shoulder from Atari, who prefers to sell to the traditional home electronic stores, while Mattel is more toy-focused with the Intellivision.
Yeah, they would be, of course. They are a toy company.
Exactly. That's where their distribution chain is and everything else. And Atari, coming from Warner Brothers and stuff, they're thinking, high-end electronics. Now, the Atari model in this case would be a far better model because the people at the electronic store, that staff is more specialized. They understand the technology better. Yeah. They're going to be able to judge also what the good product is from the bad product a little bit better. And they're also sort of used to the higher ticket prices and how to deal with that inventory. Yeah. Whereas the toy makers, they're used to much lower ticket items, higher profit margins, and they're also used to being able to return the stuff if it doesn't sell.
Yeah.
Which is going to be a huge, huge problem after the crash with all these startup companies that don't have the funds to take the product back and refund. This is going to be a major – it's sort of it's an interesting anecdote that really highlights where this problem is coming from. The toy retailers want in, and they really don't know what they're getting into. And the last one is Will Niebling of TSR talks about the company getting into game publishing on the Apple II within the next year. Now, obviously, TSR never does get into game publishing. They end up licensing. They've already licensed to Mattel for Intellivision games. They've licensed to a few other people for different electronic products, but they're never actually going to produce their own games. And I'm still curious as to how far that project ever got inside of TSR. Because it would have been interesting. Obviously, SSI is going to get the license a few years later, but that's, still like 7 years in the future or 5 years in the future.
Yeah. But speaking of the toy retailers, they are urged to attend CES.
The Consumer Electronics Show will, for the first time ever, boast over 1,000 companies displaying their wares, and the organizers and major manufacturers like Commodore are urging the toy retailers to attend by taking out a big ad promoting the VIC-20 to toy retailers. There is also talk about how computers will replace consoles in the coming years, so toy retailers should be making the big initial investment in staff training and inventory to get in on the ground floor.
Yeah, like you just talked about, but they don't have that kind of stuff right now.
No, they're not really prepared for this, but this push to replace the video game systems with computers, which if you look at the pricing, the Atari 5200 is going to be priced at about $300 when it comes out, and the VIC-20 is already at that price.
Yep.
And, unfortunately we didn't do it for the 7 Minutes in Heaven today, but if you look at a game like Jelly Monster or Rat Race, yeah, the 5200 is a graphically superior system to the VIC-20, but not necessarily by that much, especially when you consider that the VIC-20 has the full keyboard and is a computer, And with the Commodore 64 also coming out this year, there is definitely an argument to be made that if you're looking at the market as it is right now, the fact that the only way a console can be better than a computer is to be as expensive as a computer, it doesn't look like consoles really have that much of a future.
No, true.
And it's easy to understand why retailers would believe this, why consumers would believe this. And that, video game consoles might just be a fad. Maybe it is just that in-between phase before we all have really cool games-enabled computers at home.
And in Europe, it really looked like that would be the future for many years.
Oh, definitely. I mean, in Europe, that is going to be the paradigm basically until the Genesis makes some real inroads.
So pretty much all of my friends, they were PC gamers, so C64, Amiga 500, and so on and so forth, until the PlayStation. That was the first console that really made a headway in Denmark. I mean, we knew people who had an NES, an SNES, or a Master System, or a Genesis, but they were very, very few and far between.
Exactly. Same thing in Germany. I mean, I had a buddy who had an NES. I had another buddy who had a Super NES, but that was it.
Yep.
Everybody else, and even those people all had Amigas and PCs in addition to that, or C64s, or a combination.
In my experience, the kids who had the consoles were the rich kids, because it was so expensive. I mean, buying the console probably wasn't that expensive, but the games, they were so expensive, and we were just stealing them, so no worries.
Well, and that's the thing. We were so used to having, our giant box with 200 games in it without even thinking about it.
Yep.
And the way that we interacted with the games was different than what a console player. This whole idea of, I'm going to sit here for 150 hours and play through Contra and memorize every movement. You're like, dude, why would you do that? Just turn on the trainer, play it for 2 hours, and then move to the next game.
Exactly.
And if we do play something for a longer period of time, it's either a strategy game or a two-player game where we're just our eyes are gonna bleed as we kill each other over and over again.
Yep.
And so, that the very way that we interacted with games in Europe was so different to the way it was done in the States.
Yeah.
And I had the fortunate situation where every Christmas I went back to the States to visit my grandparents, and I still had contact with friends from my childhood. So I would go to their houses, and these guys, they had all the consoles every time. So every time I'd go there, NES, Genesis, Super NES, PlayStation, and so forth. And so I got to see that side of the culture as well.
Yeah.
And it really was a very, very different approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, okay. But so this, Commodore, these ads in the toy magazines directly talking to the toy retailers saying, hey guys, get in on the ground floor. Here's William Shatner telling you got to be stocking the VIC-20 was pretty kick-ass.
Yeah, indeed. Corvus shows off their concept.
No, one before that.
Oh, sorry. Did I skip one?
You skipped one.
Oh, I did. Osborne 1 gets reviewed.
While not a machine that will have any long-lasting effects on gaming, the Osborne 1 would show the way forward for portable computing and give us the renowned Osborne effect.
So what's the Osborne effect then?
The Osborne effect is when the head of a company announces right after the machine is launched that the next version of the machine is going to be so much better that everybody decides not to buy this version of it.
Yes, I remember that story.
Yeah.
seems like kind of a stupid thing to do. Yeah.
It is kind of a stupid thing to do. Also, if you're going to build a portable PC with only a 5-inch screen, please make sure that it has enough columns to display all the text at once, and so you don't have to scroll back and forth, left and right to see all your text.
So I wonder how big was the screen on the SX64?
Oh, it was probably about the same.
Yeah, wasn't it?
The only difference is that the Commodore 64 didn't try to be a business machine with a full typewriter, whatever, 80 columns or 40 columns or whatever it is. And this one was trying to do that, and it solved the problem by having you scroll left and right to see all the text.
Yeah. Not a very good solution to that problem.
No.
But moving on, we get to Corvus shows off their concept.
The Corvus Concept Computer, a 68,000 base machine with a rotating monitor, has been shown off behind closed doors at the West Coast Computer Fair. The pricey $4,000 machine will ship with 256K of RAM and produce a black and white screen running at a resolution of 720 by 560 pixels.
So those numbers are pretty impressive for 82, eh?
Extremely impressive, and this turnable screen, which is very much a wide screen, is actually perfect for word processing.
Yeah. And
the biggest seller or the biggest attracting point for this machine is Edward, EDWORD, which is the word processor for the system. And amongst its many cool features, it allows you to undo what you did all the way back to the beginning of the document. So it's using that extra memory, because undo functions exist in other programs, but they're usually like one or two steps back. This is really using that additional memory to allow you to undo a ton. Now, they're saying all the way back to the beginning of the document. How far that really can reach in reality is probably a memory limitation.
Yes.
But
256K of RAM is huge in those days.
Exactly. And the fact that they're doing it with just, black and white screen, no gray tones, is helping, on the video memory side.
Yeah.
So it's an impressive machine. It's not really going to go anywhere big, but it sort of starts giving you this idea of the desktop publishing machine market. And it's also starting to show that manufacturers are really taking the 68,000 seriously.
Yeah. Yep. Of course, that will power our favorite machine later on.
Exactly. So pretty.
But I don't know the price point.
Oh yeah.
Next piece of news is that Commodore takes on IBM.
The meteoric rise of the IBM PC has not gone unnoticed by Commodore. They have just announced the BX256, a 256K evolution of their B series of machines, which, in addition to a 6509 CPU, will have a daughter board housing a 4.77 MHz 8088 chip and run CPM for just under $3,000.
So these are definitely some of the business machines. I don't know a lot about Commodore's business machines, but that sounds pretty impressive for the time as well.
Yeah, they're I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but they're glorified pets.
Yeah.
Commodore pets.
Yeah.
And the problem is, of course, now that IBM has set the standard, anybody else trying to get into the business machine area is pretty much dead in the water. There's also a rumor in Your Computer magazine, the English magazine this month, that Sinclair is already working on a business machine. Whether or not this is actually the QL or not is I couldn't confirm, but it's very likely it's the first beginnings of what will become the QL.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if you're not IBM compatible, who the frag cares?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's the big problem. And obviously they're going CPM. I mean, if they're going to put an 8088 processor in it, and it's going to run CPM, you're essentially already doing an IBM PC compatible for most intents and purposes, except, of course, that nobody's bothering to use CPM on an IBM PC. Everybody's just using DOS, MS-DOS, or PC-DOS as it's called.
Yep.
And that's going to be the downside to all these machines. The Osborne is also, as we reported previously, it's a CPM machine. So, it's great if you're still stuck in the past, but CPM is as good as dead since the PC shipped with PC-DOS.
Yep, true. So, IBM has no time for the UK.
IBM's PC success has led to a backlog of over 40,000 orders in the US and has led the company to declare that they have no plans for a UK launch. Some importers are bringing the machine in through US retailers like Computerland.
So they simply had so much success in the US that they didn't have time to produce them for the UK?
Yeah, basically the UK market. And again, we have to remember that the UK market at this point is very much a market in decline. While the United States is going through a recession, the UK at this point is an absolute freaking mess economically.
Yep.
And so the idea of launching in the UK, and also remember the European Union as we know it today doesn't exist yet. Every market that you want to launch in is a brand new market. That you have to do all sorts of new stuff for, and new regulations and different language packs and everything else, that if IBM is going to launch in Europe, they're going to have to put in a lot of time to prepare the machine for that launch. And if they are not even meeting demand in the US, it's really not even in the cards for them anytime soon.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Which is going to leave a lot of room